Hey there, I'm Kat, and this is Brews and Reviews. In today's video, I'm going to be talking to you guys about Crescent City Book 2, House of Sky and Breath by Sarah J Maas. I'm going to go through a quick recap of this book in case you need it, and then I'm going to talk about some of my thoughts. This review is going to be spoilery. I'm sorry if you wanted a spoiler-free review, but this just isn't a review for you. I didn't have enough spoiler-free thoughts to fill up a video because all of my thoughts tailored around specific things that happened, and I just want to talk about them, so, you know, click away if you don't want spoilers. And I'm going to put this book down because it's really heavy, and I am weak. So let's do a little recap. House of Sky and Breath starts off with a character that we have not met doing things that we don't know about. So in the prologue we follow Sophie as she tries to rescue her brother from a death camp, and she does successfully manage to do that, only she gets caught by the Hive and thrown into the sea to die. Then we transition back to the characters that we know and love, and it's a couple of months later after the events of the last book. Now Bryce and Hunt are deciding to take things slow. They've decided that they're not going to be intimate with each other for a little while so that they can just, you know, calm down, get used to things, enjoy themselves before they enjoy themselves. A lot of the plot around Bryce and Hunt when they are together is just about them being intimate with each other or not being intimate with each other. So it is a very large focus for these two characters, I think to the detriment of the plot, but I'll get into that later. Bryce and Hunt are trying to lay low so that they don't, you know, disturb the wrath of the Asteri, who have told them that if they stay quiet and do nothing, then, you know, it'll be a good time for them, and if they do stuff, then they might get murdered. But they discover very quickly that it's going to be more difficult than they think to stay out of things. As the war in Panjara is becoming more and more violent, and the rebels start to come towards Crescent City, and they start to question the order of things and whether it's right to have this certain hierarchy and setup that they do have. A key player in this is Prince Cormac, who has been invited to Crescent City by Bryce's father, the Autumn King, and betrothed to her because she needed that. She's not super happy about it and gets off on a really bad foot with Cormac, but it turns out he's actually working with the rebels, and he's trying to enlist Rune to get in contact with their agent Daybright, because Rune has the ability to communicate mind to mind. He was also in love with Sophie, who was mentioned in the prologue of this book, so his assholery is kind of explainable. Now at the end of House of Earth and Blood, there were two archangels, Sandriel and Micah, who were murdered by our main characters in a great way. Well, they have to be replaced. So Hunt is working now as a free angel for the new governor, Celestina, who seems rather nice. She's a little bit too nice, and Hunt is not particularly buying it. Another complication arises when Sandriel's Triori are split in half, and some of them come to work alongside Hunt and the others, and they don't get along. First there's the Hammer, who is generally just an asshole, and Hunt spent the entire first book saying, "I hate that guy, what a dick." And there's also the Hellhound, Baxian, who seems like he could be nicer and is trying to make up for his actions with Sandriel. But he also doesn't really understand how to relax. He doesn't know what video games are or like how to be a normal guy, so it's quite interesting to see his development. And he always seems to be popping up by the main characters when he wasn't invited. Now in the meantime, Tharian, who is the spy master for the River Queen, has been sent on a quest to find Sophie Renas, and he ends up involving Bryce, Hunt, Rune, and the others to try and track her down. Everybody spends the majority of this book looking for Sophie Renas, and her little brother Emil, who has disappeared because he didn't want to be taken in by the rebels. As it turns out, the person that was trying to get a hold of him was an asshole. Just wanted to blow a bunch of people up and really doesn't like the Veneer. Now another key player in this book is Ethan, who's been kicked out of his pack at the beginning of the book, and he sort of goes to Bryce because she's the only one he can go to. He's completely alone. And he becomes more friends with Rune and his friends throughout the book and works alongside them. And this is where my head gets a little bit muddled, because in the same way I read the first book, part 2 of the second book also went on for too long, and also just had a lot of things that happened that were kind of pointless by the end. Just completely pointless. So everyone runs around looking for Sophie Renas, and Bryce and Cormac are pretending that they are betrothed, even though neither of them is actually interested in being betrothed. It just really suits their purposes so they can get on and do stuff. Rune decides that he is going to start working with the rebels and makes contact with Agent Daybright, who names him Agent Night. And I will talk more about this later, but Night and Day are the cutest damn things about this book, and I loved them. They develop a rapport in their back and forth communications, even though they should be keeping things just to pure information, but they get a little bit closer than they should. Bryce and Hunt take a trip to the Bone Quarter because they think that that's where Sophie Renas told her brother to go and hide. He didn't hide there. They in fact met the Underking and he attacked them because they found out the truth that when souls go through to the Bone Quarter, they are not there to have an eternal happiness. They are in fact being transformed into light and being eaten. Yeah. So demons attack them, and Bryce and Hunt figure out that Hunt can shoot his lightning into Bryce, and then Bryce can be like supercharged and do lots of magical things. So they manage to escape the Bone Quarter, and then Ethan gets really worried about his brother, whose soul is currently in the Bone Quarter. And he's like, did they turn him into light yet? Because I don't want them to do that. Can we check? So they go and see this guy who has these 3 mystics, like, in a pond. It reminded me of Minority Report, if you guys ever saw that. And they're all drugged up and they can go off with their mind and find some answers. So they asked about Connor, but actually met a Prince of the Dead instead, who was like, I don't want to give you answers, maybe you should do some stuff. I'm gonna kill this guy now because he's here. So Ethan rescues the mystics before they can, you know, be mind fried in hell, and he feels really bad about it because he's like, oh, these people are all drugged up. Do they even want to be here? They're just slaves? This is really dodgy. This system is really dodgy. So they all leave, but Ethan does come back later to try and convince the woman, who it turns out is an alpha wolf, and he's very interested in that, to try and make her leave, but she won't leave. But instead he steals the alchemist rings, which are full of fire sprites, so he just steals them, and he's like, well, we're gonna free them because this guy's a dick. Sorry if you can hear the infernal van outside my window that's making a lot of noise, but vans. Bryce, Hunt, Juniper, and Fury go and take a look around the Viper Queen's meat market area to try and find Emil, but they don't find him there. But actually they do find him there because Bryce has figured out that Danica told Sophie to hide him there, so that's where he is. She manages to get Emil out of the city without notifying anybody else. Very alien of her, if you ask me. And she sends him to live with her human parents because it turns out he's completely human and doesn't have any Thunderbird powers like all the Vanir that have been looking for him think that they do. So he becomes their adoptive son and her adopted brother, which is, you know, nice for a happy ending. Who knows if it'll last. I spent the entirety of this book thinking that her parents were gonna die, but they didn't. So that's good. The group are then informed that the Ophion rebels managed to launch a successful heist on this train and managed to capture these newly developed mech suits that will allow the Asteri to do very, very bad things to all the humans, pretty much annihilate them, take energy directly from the ground and use it to power their magic, and it would be a very bad time. They also took a bunch of supplies, and it turns out that it's the Lightcrawlers division of the Ophion rebels who are led by the woman that Emil ran away from earlier. I don't remember this woman's name, and I won't. I think it's Pippa. It's Pippa. So they go there so Hunt can have a look at the mech suits, and he's like, listen, we need to destroy these because this would be very, very bad. And Pippa's like, no, we're gonna use them. Ha ha ha. And then she shoots a bunch of Vanir who had volunteered for the cause just because they're Vanir. Like an asshole. So the group destroy the suits and then they make a run for it. Their boat gets sunk, the Hive finds them, has a little conversation with them, and a giant ship comes out the water, saves them, takes them away, and then they're just like underground in a giant sea ship for the Sea Queen. I think Sea Queen? Ocean Queen? A different Wet Queen, not Tharion's River Queen. So they're having a good time because they're now alive. They find out that Sophie did indeed die. She didn't make it when they tried to collect her. Hunt, meanwhile, is still really, really angry about them nearly dying. So Bryce goes to calm him down, and then they have sex, and they decide that they're mates, and they have like mated sex. And she teleports them almost out of the building, which should have been very, very bad, but they were still inside. It was all good. So now they're a mated pair, and they're all living at the mercy of the Hind at the moment, because if she tells anyone that she saw them, then they're all dead, basically. She decides to keep it a secret, much to everyone's surprise. They are constantly thinking that she's going to be waiting for the right time to use that information. Now, I totally forgot, but all the Princes of Hell keep popping up to talk to Bryce and being like, maybe you should learn how to use your powers, Bryce. Maybe you and Hunt should learn how to use your powers together because you can do good stuff. And they also keep talking about readying their demons for war and bringing them to Bryce's world, which Bryce is, you know, not so happy about that. She's like, please don't do that. We don't want that. And Apollyon, who is the Star Eater, I think he's the king of the 7th level of hell, he's just like, just come back and talk to me when you learn the truth, okay? Just come back later. There's a ball because there's a whole thing with Celestina and another archangel called Ephraim mating. That's like a punishment for something Celestina inadvertently let happen. And in it, the Autumn King is going to try and announce that Bryce and Cormac are definitely going to get together. So she outsmarts everyone and immediately introduces Hunt as her mate to the Asteri, and they're like, cool, nice to see you mated, which thwarts all of the Autumn King's plans to unite her with another Fae house. So that's great for Hunt and Bryce, and that, I must say, is a moment that I really enjoyed because I really love it when Bryce gets one over on people. Tharion's been stringing along the River Queen's daughter for a while. He decides he's had enough of it, so breaks it off with her, and then realizes that he's going to be imprisoned under the river forever. because the River Queen is a bitch. So he decides to defect to the Viper Queen and makes a blood oath to her, which is a very, very questionable idea. So there's a lot more plot stuff. Anyway, it turns out that Baxian was actually Danica's mate, and Danica decided to never tell Bryce that, even though she was mated for 2 years before she died, because Danica just loves to keep secrets from everyone, which is not super, but it does mean that Baxion is actually an ally. Now he's able to explain what the numbers that were carved onto Sophie Renast's dead body mean, and they are a location in a specific archive in the Asteri's Palace that have specific information that is apparently fucked up, according to the CCTV of everybody walking out of that room looking like they'd seen a ghost. So our group naturally decide that they have to go break in and see what's happening. So they launch a distraction, trying to blow up the laboratories where the newly developed mech suit's being designed and made, and the others break into the Asteri's Palace. Bryce disappears off on her own to go and check the archive, and it turns out that the Asteri don't actually have this giant power over everyone. They're waiting for people to die to transfer their souls into First Light and then eat it. They've been farming everyone the whole time. Turns out they move from planet to planet, civilization to civilization, and they farm people and eat them. Not to mention they also brought all of the civilizations that currently exist in Lunathion together a long time in the past, and were like, live here, do our bidding, just slowly eat you, it'll be great. And people, you know, being forgetful, didn't really understand that in the first war against the Asteri with Hell, there were actually people working with Hell to try and take down the Asteri, because they are just trying to eat people, and Hell were like, no thanks, we kick these guys out, we'll help you kick these guys out, and, you know, it worked for a time, but not very long. So now with this revelation, Bryce is like, what the fuck? What the fuck is this? And Regulus, the bright hand, starts talking to her through a speaker, saying like, oh, isn't it nice that you finally know the truth? This is great, right? This is great. We're gonna kill you all now, though. Come along! So she goes off to find Hunt and Rune, and they've already been captured. She gets captured immediately. The Harpy is threatening to do horrible things, and then the Hind steps in and kills the Harpy. Because it turns out she was Agent Daybright and she was trying to save them, but also still maintain her cover. So Bryce beat her up before the hammer came in. They all get carted off to stand before the Asteri. I'm sorry if you can hear that van, it's just getting louder and louder. It turns out the Asteri have been after Bryce because she possesses the horn and can open gates into new worlds, so that they can go in and check out new worlds and find some more fresh delicacies for themselves. So Bryce agrees to do it if they'll let the others free, and the others are like, no. So they come up with a plan to get Bryce out of there, because she needs to escape because she has all of the information about what's really going on in the world and can actually affect some change. So she manages to get out with the Star Sword. Everybody else, like, goes down, basically. They're not dead, they're just still captured, and Hunt is made into a slave again with his powers bound. It's a very bad time, but Bryce manages to escape. She manages to get to a gate and go through it. Now when Bryce wakes up, she's just on a lawn and she's like, I need to speak to Adis, the Prince of Hell, take me to Adis, and there's this guy with bat wings like, what? I don't understand you, because they don't speak the same language. Anyway, turns out it's the Akatar gang. And Amarin and Rhysand can actually speak to Bryce, and it turns out that the Star Sword is Gwydion, a sword that they have been looking for a very long time. Now to wrap up what's happening in the Crescent City world, Ethan goes to rescue the female mystic that he knows is an alpha wolf, and it turns out is a lost Fendir heir, so she could take over from Sabine, and that would be a very good alternative to her bitchy ways. So there we have it, that is the plot. Okay, so now that the more than slightly out of order recollection of events has been covered, let's talk about my thoughts on the book, because I found this a really interesting read. First off, we started this book with a bunch of characters that we didn't know, in a place that we didn't know, doing things that we didn't really know about. We started with Sophie trying to break her brother out of a death camp with rebels that we barely even spoke about in the first book, and I just found that so jarring. And I'm not gonna lie, it made it kind of hard to care, but at the same time it was also doing that thing where it just smacked you in the face with some plot, and it's like, you just take all this in and then we'll get back to what you know. Just have some info dump of what we're going to focus on in this bit, and then we'll get on with it. Personally, I understand why it had to happen there, because it is like the catalyst for everything else that happens in the plot, but at the same time, it just felt really out of place, and I don't know, it was weird to me. Then we start this search for Sophie, if she's still alive, and Emil, who the characters know is alive and hiding somewhere in the city thanks to a message from Danica. Now this search covers most of part 1 and part 2, and I just think it went on for way too long. It just seemed like we were constantly looking and then constantly not finding anything, and then in the end it turned out Bryce had found something and was just leading everyone else on. Which is great, don't get me wrong, I really liked that Bryce had like the forethought to do that in a clever way, and she didn't just blindly trust everyone, because the there's just a lot of people in this mix that all wanted different things with this boy, and she just wanted to get him out of the situation. So that was great, but it's also largely pointless. The whole book we are searching for this boy, and it's just like, well, he's just gone off somewhere else now, he's just living somewhere else. Like, we probably could have found this information without going on a wild goose chase for half the book, but that's just personally something I didn't really like. I like the inclusion of the rebels, but I almost feel like, aside from Cormac and Agent Daybright, they're all very one-dimensional. Like, Pippa's very, very one-dimensional. You know, they just blow things up and turn up and shoot things, and I didn't love that. I feel like I'm sounding like I didn't love this book, but I enjoyed this book. I didn't love this book. When we finally got to the point where Baxian was revealed as Danica's mate, and he actually had some information that he could share that led us to the Asteria Palace, that whole section, I loved that. That was great. It wasn't like emotionally crippling, but I just really enjoyed finding out that the entire existence of all of these people is a lie. I mean, that was kind of spelled out in the trip to the Bone Quarter with the Underking, but it wasn't spelled out to the extent that the Asteri are just nomming away at the populace and using everyone until they drain them dry. So I love that twist, even though it took more of a sci-fi-ish turn, because the Asteri have been moving from planet to planet and trialing out different civilizations, and I just thought that was really cool, and that's a good villain. That is worthwhile fighting against. That's not just, oh, I want to be in charge of the planet. No, they're already in charge of the planet. It's about saving people's souls and seeing where they go in the afterlife and, you know, defeating the evil. I don't know. I'm excited to see where that goes. I really need them to team up with Hell and just have a huge battle with our characters that we love and the demons from Hell just working together. It feels right. I'm also really happy that Bryce managed to get out of that situation. I did not expect her to actually travel to Prythian. Now, one of the things that I had spoiled for me for this, it's my fault, I left it too long to read this book, but I knew that Rhysand and Bryce talked to each other, but I didn't have any context surrounding that, so I just didn't think that she would be going to his world. For some reason, I just did not make that connection. So seeing her end up in Prythian, just on the lawn, and be caught by Asriel, it just made me so happy. I was definitely squealing a little bit, even though I knew it was coming. I was just like, ah! It was so exciting. So I'm very excited for the next book and what can happen there. I had this prediction all the way along because I knew that these worlds were going to cross with each other. So I had this theory that Bryce's sword was Gwydian and the knife that goes with it was Truth Teller, and I was like, yes. So I was happy about getting that prediction right, and also that Thea, who was the Fae that fought in the war with Hell against the Asteri, was also the person that put Koschei from A Court of Silver Flames into his little prison with the sword, because they briefly mentioned that, I think, in one of the other books. It's mentioned, so that's my theory for that. But honestly, I'm just really excited to see what happens with that. I don't have many further comments on it, but it is something that is very exciting. Now let's go back and talk about some of the characters and their plot lines throughout this book. Cormac. I was primed to dislike this man from the moment I met him, and then within a couple of chapters we were like, oh no, he's actually a good guy. He's that same guy from the prologue. I get it now. And I was eating my words a little bit, so that's fine. I'll take it. Sometimes that's what happens. He was an okay guy in the end, and that's all I have to say about him. I think it was interesting to see like a different side of him, and I love that he made the introduction between Rune and Lydia, who are my favourite part of this entire book. Day and night, their exchanges, everything that happened between them, I absolutely adored it. And I just think it was like the perfect way to go with Rune. And Lydia as a character I just really enjoyed because she is obviously betraying the Asteri and everything that she's supposedly working towards. As the Hind, she's obviously despised by everyone and everyone kind of hates her, but she's working in this underhanded way. And at the end, when Rune finds out that she is Agent Daybright, it made me so sad because I knew this was going to happen and he was going to be like, oh, it's her, that evil witch. And I knew she was going to be so sad, and then when he shut her out, I was like, no, stop, please. I knew it was going to happen. I knew it, and I was like, he just really needs to get over that quickly because I just need them together and I need them to be happy. Can we just let that happen, please? I don't have much to say about Tharion. I think we had too many chapters with Tharion. I don't really care about his storyline. I'm sorry, he made a stupid decision with the River Queen's daughter and then was like, oh fuck, I fucked up. And he had indeed fucked up. And then he went and gave a blood oath to the Viper Queen, which is more fuck up. You were making bad decisions all the time, so stop that. I like the reveal of Baxian as Danica's mate for the fact that it makes Baxian a character that is interesting, and I'm very intrigued as to where he could be going with that character. He seems like he could be a nice guy underneath all of the horrible things that he's had to do, in the same way that Hunt was a nice guy underneath all of the horrible things that he had to do. But I also think it kind of makes me dislike Danica a little bit more because she's a really bad friend. She's so bad. Tell your friends. I mean, I know Bryce was party girl central back in the day, but honestly, if I was Bryce, I would be so upset that she'd just never told me any of this, and I'd be like, she didn't even think I was her friend. She didn't even consider me a friend. She just decided not to tell me any of this stuff. And I would have had a real problem with that. And I mean, Bryce was upset by it, but like maybe not as much as I think she should have been, because Danica's done some fucked up shit to her, and I just feel like Danica maybe she's not the best friend to Bryce. I know she came through in the last book and that still makes me sad, but like, ugh. Danica, why? Now let's talk about Bryce and Hunt, because I had some feelings about their storyline throughout this. Their whole let's be celibate and just hang out together thing was just never gonna work, because every time they were together they were always thinking about banging each other, so just get on with it. Like, get it over with. And then they did, in public, every time, and it just felt really icky to me. Some of the places where they decided to get it on, like right after they'd done a workout in the gym, when they were all sweaty and smelly, and Hunt kept smelling her while he was going down on her, and I just thought, that's good if that's enjoyable to you. I personally would just be like, get the fuck away from me, I'm sweaty. So anyway, let's talk about their mating, because their mating is kind of an odd one, because they chose to be mates before they were actually mates, and it's interesting because they're technically two different species. He's an angel and she's a fae, so they just decided to call each other mates, and then they called each other mates. Like all the time, as does happen in Sarah J Maas' book. And then later they confirmed that they mated in the way that fae understand mating, so technically it's the same mating as we used to in all of Sarah J Maas' other books, but it was a bit weird because it felt, you know, not fated. It was like, oh, we just decided now we're mates, ta-da! So that was a little bit weird, but like I got behind it in the end. I also think that we have been very, very set up to believe that Hunt is a Thunderbird or has some element of Thunderbird in him because of the lightning powers, because the Bloodhound says he smells differently to the other angels, and I just feel like that's where we're gonna go with that, but nobody's really making that connection yet. So whether it happens or not, this theory has been immortalized in this video and I can be embarrassed about it later. My only other thought about Hunt is that it's really annoying that he is like enslaved again, and I can just see it being really annoying in the next book and not something that I'm gonna like personally, because I feel like we just got out of this situation. Why are you back in it again? I just think it's gonna really annoy me personally. I can understand that it does increase the stake, because obviously Hunt is gonna be used against Bryce, and I hate that when that happens. It makes me so sad. So, you know, it's not a bad thing. It's just something that is going to like get under my skin and I don't like it. Now let's finally talk about Bryce, who I believe is a very different character in this book from the first book. Now I know a lot has changed at the end of the first book, but I don't really think that we get to see her snarkiness and spirit in the same way that we did in the first one. I know she's trying to lay low, but it almost seems like she's trying to take on the I'll do these secret ministrations kind of role rather than just doing the thing and actually trusting the people around her, which is very Aelin Galathinius / Rhysand. Like, come on guys, please trust the people that love you. But I didn't feel like there were as many moments that were like, Bryce is a badass, oh my god, in this one, and I don't know why, I just didn't quite feel it the same. I did really love how she got one over on the Autumn King though, because he is just a pain in the rear, and the whole thing where he's like, I own you now because you've claimed that you're a Fae princess, so you are a Fae princess and therefore my property, and I will do what I want with you, sell you to this guy, da-da! So I really enjoyed that she got one over on him. Someone's really gonna need to kill the Autumn King because he is an asshole, but also so is the Autumn King currently in Prythian. Is it a thing about Autumn Kings just being an asshole? I did really like the development in Bryce's powers here, because the element of having to like charge her up is really interesting, because she's basically a conduit for everyone else's power, which is essentially where she got her power from. She got all of that magic from the gate when she did the drop. So it definitely makes sense, and I like that there's a consistency in that. I'm also just really, really intrigued to see how she interacts with the Inner Circle and everyone in Prythian, and how long it takes her to get back into her world, because there's a lot of shit going down there, and she really had better get on with, you know, saving that world. Overall, I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. I didn't cry at the end of it, and I was really expecting to. I'm a little bit disappointed that I didn't cry. I love crying at the end of a Sarah J Maas book because, you know, there's something really nice about having your emotions ripped apart and just like thrown on your face. So when I didn't get as emotionally invested in this one, I was a little bit, you know, disappointed. I do think that this book does suffer a little bit from middle book syndrome, because there are the events of the first book, and then the events of this book are largely unimportant. They're largely irrelevant to the major plotline. It's just a method of getting from A, where everyone left off in House of Earth and Blood, to B, where everyone ends up at the end of House of Sky and Breath. And I just don't necessarily think it was the right way to get from A to B, because it feels like a lot of it just didn't matter. But also, it feels like House of Flame and Shadow is just gonna be a clusterfuck of, oh my god, bad things are happening to everyone! So I'm kind of sitting here thinking maybe this is like the beginning part, and then the next book is just going to be a whole lot of madness, and I'm going to love it. So that's where I'm kind of sitting with this book. I don't know. I wish it was a 5 out of 5 stars. I wish I'd been slightly more emotionally connected. Perhaps it was that there were too many characters and storyline that didn't matter as much as they could have done, and the characters that I did really like were not necessarily doing things that I wanted them to be doing. So maybe it's a me problem in how I received this book. I still really enjoyed it, but it just didn't quite hit the heights of what I was expecting it to. But, you know, sometimes that happens. Now, those are all my thoughts. I don't really want to go into my predictions for what's going to happen in the next book, given that as I'm filming this, it comes out tomorrow. So I'll hold my predictions in for another day and not be embarrassed when they're all wrong. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!